Well, with all due respect, Ross Coulthart is not a scientist. And the statement he made in the last sentence is exactly the basis for a scientific paper that I submitted for publication last night. There is no non-gravitational acceleration, despite the fact that there is evaporation from the object. That means the object is very massive, anomalously massive, 1,000 times more massive than Borisov, the previous object, and 1,000,000 times more massive than Oumuamua. And this is just the lower limit. That's the minimum mass that is needed in order for it not to show any push back away from the sun. So if you see, an object that is, let's say, a dust particle, you see twice an object of the size of a dust particle, and then you see a boulder that is 1,000,000 times more massive appearing. Wouldn't that be curious? Wouldn't that be strange? Wouldn't that be anomalous? And just to remind whoever is viewing this, Ross himself keeps talking for years about unidentified anomalous phenomena. So he makes a living out of talking, not doing science, just talking and speaking to other people who do science. And he himself is engaged with things that appear anomalous. I'm doing the science. I published scientific papers. I wrote 9 scientific papers over the past 2 months on 3I Atlas. I'm not a journalist asking for the advice of other people to tell me what this object is. I'm actually doing the research to tell me what the object is. So for a journalist to go around and solicit consensus view about an object and then talk for years about anomalous phenomena that the same people that he's talking with right now would completely dismiss as irrelevant. The same UAP that he keeps talking about, UFOs, UAP, and he talks about it for many, many, many broadcasts. If he were to go to the same people that he talked with about 3I Atlas, they would completely dismiss that as irrelevant. Yet, he believes that there are unidentified anomalous phenomena and he keeps talking about it forever. But for 3I Atlas, no. He will go to the same people that dismiss UAP and ask for their advice and then use sort of an average over their opinions to claim that when AVI LOEB does scientific work on this object, we should not accept it. Why? Because a group of other people said to him that we should not consider any anomalies. And I say, well, exactly this sentence that he said at the end, where the object doesn't show any non-gravitational acceleration, that sentence is an anomaly. Why? Because in order for the object not to be affected by its evaporation, it needs to be extremely massive, anomalously massive, 1,000,000 times more massive than Oumuamua. And we haven't seen 1,000,000 Oumuamuas. So, why would we not consider that as an issue? Why would we say, okay, well, it's just a giant object that appears after we saw tiny objects, and that's not an anomaly. It's just another object. Let's not even think about it. Why would we ignore the fact that it's in the plane of the planets? That's an anomaly. So the current consensus of those people that he spoke with is that 3I Atlas is just an unusually large object that is on an unusually fine-tuned trajectory with the planets by chance. So it's big by chance. It's aligned with the planets by chance. It has nickel without iron by chance. It had a plume of scattered light ahead of it towards the sun instead of behind it, away from the sun, the way comets show, by a process that we don't understand but we don't care about. And it will come close to Mars and Jupiter by chance. So the timing was particularly, fine-tuned, but by chance. And, all of these coincidences, each of them has a low probability. Some of them we've never seen before. for comets in the solar system, including the polarization of light. I didn't even mention that, but the light is polarized in a way that was never seen in a comet before. It has a very negative polarization. And all of these are scientific matters, scientific facts. I wrote 9 scientific papers about these facts, submitted them to journals. And then Ross, who keeps talking forever about unidentified anomalous phenomena, decides to realize what this object is by asking around people, just asking, astronomers that he would like to pick. And my question to him is, why don't you ask the same astronomers about UAP and say the same thing that they say about UAP, because that's what they tell you. Just to remind everyone, this is the scale of Manhattan Island in a single object. And that's why I find this object quite unusual, because Oumuamua was roughly the size of a football field. Compare Manhattan Island to a football field. That's the difference in scales. So we saw 2 objects on the scale of a football field, and now we see an object on the scale of Manhattan Island. And Ross Coulthart is saying, I consulted with people and they told me that it's not anomalous. My hope is that when it comes close to the high-rise camera around Mars, that we would get a good look at the object itself, because the pixel size would be about 30 kilometers, and then we can learn more. So it's not a matter of asking around astronomers what this object is. To figure out what it is, we need to observe it. And that's where the answer would come from, not by going around and polling people. It's not a political question that we should find an answer by asking a lot of people to average their answers and figure out the answer, the popular answer. Science is not a popularity contest. And it's really ridiculous to go around and ask people what this object is. That's not the way to find the answer. Maybe it's the way to find the answer for a journalist, but it's not the actual way to find an answer. The actual way to find an answer is by observing it with as much data as possible and using the data to figure out what it is. And if the object doesn't show a cometary tail for 2 months and just shows a glow towards the sun instead of behind, away from the sun, then it's different from familiar comets. If the object is, up to 1 million times more massive than Oumuamua, then it's anomalous. If the object has a chance of 1 in 500 to appear within the plane of the planets, then it's anomalous, because you should have seen hundreds of objects before one of them would be by chance aligned. And so these are anomalies. I'm not saying it's not natural for sure. I'm just saying we should be intrigued by the anomalies rather than go around and ask people that would tell us that it's nothing interesting, because that's not the way science is done. That's not the way we figure out the truth. And think about FIFA, the Soccer World Organization. If FIFA would have asked Ross to figure out whether there was a goal or not in a controversial goal on a soccer match, Ross will go around and ask the players, ask the audience, what do you think? Was there a goal or not? And figure out some answer. But the way FIFA does it is not ask Ross Coulthart to poll around people and figure out what happened. They use a camera, a video camera, and see whether the goal was scored or not, depending on what the imagery shows. That's the way science is done, collecting evidence. We are not going around and asking people about what the answer is. We just use instruments to figure it out. I am a scientist. I've been a practicing scientist for 4 decades. I wrote more than 1,000 scientific papers. And the irony of the situation is that I'm still doing science. I'm in the trenches. I just wrote a paper last night talking about how massive this object is. And then you find a journalist, just like a commentator saying, oh, no, that's not a correct statement because I went around and asked people about it. I mean, this is really ridiculous.